1975, Australians agreed to destroy our economy so that it fitted into a new economic order, the New World Order. The Second General Conference of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, met in Lima, Peru from 12 March to the 26th of March 1975. The outcome of that meeting was the Lima Declaration, a blueprint for the transfer of technology, tools and jobs to third world or developing nations, leaving the developed nations such as Australia short of technology, tools and jobs. This is now a reality with around 90% of our agriculture and manufacturing jobs gone. The result, yet another third world in the making. So, what is the Lima Declaration? How does it affect you and your family? Its correct title is Lima Declaration and Plan of Action on Industrial Development and Cooperation. It is an international trade agreement similar to GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. Australia is a signatory to the Lima Declaration as it is to many GATT agreements. Australia signed the Lima Agreement with the total support of all major political parties. Whitlam, Fraser, Hawke, Keating, Hewson, Howard, Rudd, the Democrats, the Greens, and the Nationals all subscribe to this type of economic genocide, albeit under different names: North-South Dialogue, GATT, Internationalism, Interdependence, International Monetary Fund, the IMF, World Bank, or the New World Order. All different names for the same plan of control of the world through the money system, controlled by sick minds, treasonous politicians, and bumbling academics and bureaucrats. It should be clearly understood that the Lima Declaration is one of many hundreds of international agreements and treaties signed by Australia, usually by one man, the Minister for Foreign Affairs or his nominee, who signs on behalf of all Australians. In 1975, that man was Senator Don Willacy. It should be clearly understood that 99% of Australians do not know what such agreements and treaties are about, nor how they affect their lives, and they are not told deliberately, because if they were, there would be riots in the streets. This video deals very briefly with just one of hundreds of agreements and treaties between the UN and Australia, the United Nations Lima Declaration of 1975. International treaties in the main are the handiwork of the United Nations and have been used by Australian governments to undermine Australian sovereignty. The High Court decision on the Franklin Dam issue in Tasmania is a case in point, used to put in place processes the impact of which the Australian people are completely unaware, and if they were aware, would be totally opposed to processes that get around the Australian Commonwealth Constitution. In other words, treason. And treason is being committed in the name of international treaty, or the other names given to them such as conventions, or in this case declaration, the Lima Declaration. You may say treason is a strong word, but after viewing this video you will say it is not strong enough, without doubt sufficient reason to impeach the Australian government and opposition on charges of treason. So, how did our governments give effect to the Lima Declaration? Simply, the Lima Declaration is an agreement to wind down Australian manufacturing by around 30% and to import that amount from other preferred countries together with as much primary produce as we can consume, such as fruit, meat, etc. The 30% was a target that is now blown out. Current estimates are that 90% of our production capacity is gone and our jobs with it. There is no mention in the agreement about what will happen to Australians who lose their jobs, their factories or their farms. It appears they are expendable. How can a government wind down business activity? Simply by making an unlevel playing field. Increase taxes, interest rates, the cost of employing people, without the worker gaining any benefit of course, environmental planning and controls, all of these things in combination either destroy or decrease our ability to produce. A good example would be, if you wish to manufacture widgets in Sydney, you may require, say, 5 acres of industrial land at around $12 million, on which you will pay $25,000 a year rates and $25,000 land tax. It will cost some hundreds of thousands in contributions to council coffers and environmental studies, all of which you may borrow at high interest. Then, if you are lucky, you will be up and manufacturing in maybe 2 to 5 years. Then the unions will step in and cause loss of production. The government will make you subject to time-consuming unnecessary costs, paperwork, insurance and payroll tax, and force you to collect sales tax on your product, and threaten you with heavy penalties including jail sentences for non-compliance. Or, You can simply set up business offshore and export your ideas back to Australia. Our offshore neighbour, also a party to the Lima Declaration, will give you the land, assist you in every way and not tax you for the first 5 years. Their interest may range from 0 to 4%, not to mention the Australian government's incentives available to importers from preferred countries. And so the playing field is drastically tilted to get the result required by a combination of government and financial activities. So, how does the Lima Declaration affect you? Simple. 50% of the productive Australian workforce becomes unemployed. Taxes on the remaining people employed increase to pay for the unemployed. With new shortage of income, you are forced to buy cheaper imports or go without, thereby aggravating the spiral of well-planned economic transfer equals oppression. Government will increase their numbers to cover up the real unemployment statistics and/or change the definition of unemployed. If you work 10 hours a month, you will be considered employed. We now have more people in government at all levels with little to do, other than think up ways of controlling those who are left to produce what little we don't import, thinking up new revenue raising schemes and raising penalties to ensure their salaries. And last but not least, the obscure reason behind the Lima Declaration. Australia becomes a dependent nation, dependent on other nations for shoes, its machinery, its food, its survival. There is no doubt that within the grand plan of international control, there is no room for self-sufficient nations. Any nation that has all the material it needs and can grow all the food and fibre it needs cannot be totally controlled by any international body such as the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, or the World Bank. An independent nation, independent in its production of all the things it needs, cannot be bought to heel by sanctions, such as happened in South Africa and Iraq. The international monetary control cannot starve the infants of an independent nation, nor deny them medication, as they did in Iraq. If Australia cannot make its own shoes, clothes and machinery, then others will control us. That is the real purpose of the Lima Declaration, and that is why those who support the Lima Declaration, including those in influential positions, are all traitors. The following are some of the recommendations of the Lima Declaration. A new economic order by which complete control of the world and its people is planned through the total control of their economy, their means of existence. The basic economy I refer to is people. People create the need is then supplied by people's activity. All that is required for economic growth is for people to supply their own market. The proposed new economic order is not about developing third world countries' economies for the benefit of their people. It's about developing for the establishment's benefit. Our would-be masters, the would-be masters of the new world order. It is an absolute nonsense to say that a country needs to export to survive and prosper. Of course, one must export an equal amount to which one imports to balance trade. But the less it imports, the less it needs to export to effect the offset. What is required is a locally owned and controlled credit system, the essential ingredient in remaining independent of international finance, the exact opposite to the plans of the New World Masters. Every country should work toward import replacement, which is exactly the opposite of the strategy set out in the Lima Declaration and exactly the opposite to the current policy of export, export, export. Currently, Australia exports below the cost of production. Therefore, the more we export, the more we go broke. If the fundamentals on which the Lima Declaration is purported to be built were half correct, our world would have to carry out export-import trade with another world in export to survive. This is quite obviously nonsense. The whole world will continue to fall for this treachery while ever the man in the street remains as a mushroom under the spell of bankers' trickery and that of the stooges who fill both elected and public service positions on all sides of politics. The new economic order is mentioned no less than 21 times in the Lima Agreement. That is what the Lima Agreement is about. Locking the new developing countries into their economic trap and their plans for total world economic control, at the same time reducing developed countries to third world status, clamping the shackles of international debt on every human being, bringing about total world slavery and the legally enforceable shackles of debt chained to the slave master, money power. Every Australian is immediately required to make a decision between debt-controlled slavery in perpetuity or the age of prosperity. Both are eminently possible. One we will have, but which one?
Are there further formal motions? Senator Bob Brown.
Thank you, Deputy President. I ask that motion 252 relating to the introduction of the bill be taken as formal.
The question is there any objection to that motion being taken as formal? There being none, I call Senator Brown.
Thank you, Deputy President. I move that the following bill be introduced, a bill for an act to require a plebiscite on whether Australia should become a republic.
The question is that motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Senator Brown.
I thank the Senate and I present the bill and move that this bill may proceed without formalities and now be read a first time.
The question is that that motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Clerk.
A bill for an act to require a plebiscite on whether Australia should become a republic.
Senator Brown.
I thank the Clerk and I move that this bill be now read a second time. And, Mr Deputy President, I seek leave to table the explanatory memorandum, to have the second reading speech incorporated into Hansard and to continue my remarks.
Is leave granted? There being no objection, leave is granted.
The Christian Short. Mark Riley.
Mark Riley, the 7 Network, Senator Brown. You must know you played right into the sweet spot of all the conspiracy theorists today with your support for a global parliament. I'm wondering how you would see such an organisation operating. Are you talking about an international treaty organisation that might sign up to collective commitments on certain issues, or something that might legislate and then come into conflict with national parliaments? And, excuse me, a little bit of a self-interest, if it is going to be in Australia, can it be at Jarvis Bay? Because that's where Canberra should have been in the first place, surely.
Yeah, but Jarvis Bay is so beautiful. I'd like to keep that national park right like it is, and nuclear power station free, I might add. I was doing my Windsor knot before I came here, thinking of the House of Windsor, and of course they always get wound into these conspiracies, don't they? No, look, we are moving towards a globally informed community that's got to live with itself. And we have always espoused democracy. I can tell you that the two moves the Greens have made for a global democratic support for moves in the United Nations have been voted down by all other parties, both in 2002 and earlier this year. This is conceptual, but I'm talking here about vision. Why should Australia not be the centre of what is inevitably going to be a global parliamentary governance down the line, if we human beings are going to live with each other on this marvellous planet of ours as we go on to the joyride of the future? Of course we're going to have to make consensus decisions. And representative democracy, as Winston Churchill noted, is full of flaws, but it's the best we have. And if we're going to, the point I was making, if we can invade Iraq and perhaps Afghanistan in the name of democracy, surely we can peacefully get behind moves to have a global governance on such things as financial transactions, which, with a Tobin tax, could put an end to poverty, really. It's a great prospect. It's not going to happen in my lifetime, but I'm very happy to be helping build up the concept.
Lenore Taylor.
Remember, don't steal or do anything dishonest. Your government hates competition.
Anonymous News. As the world turns, what's new has our full attention. Join us to post what mainstream media will not. The truth. Australia, getting ready for the United Nations takeover. New World Order plans uncovered. In full, the complexity of it explained here. And also see links below if you do not want this read to you. It's your duty, if you truly care about our country, for your children to stop them from being enslaved by the corrupt. Please make people fully aware of this corruption forced upon us by the highly corrupt that do not have our best interests in mind. Please share this video and others spawn it everywhere. This is a long read but well worth listening to or reading it in link below. Prime Minister Julia Gillard has been charged with misprision concealment of treason. United Nations New World Order instructed our government to suspend our constitution to allow their international New World Order United Nations laws to be enacted and treaties declarations to be implemented, which could only be done when our Australian constitution terms of allegiance clauses were erased or not active. Others, including judges, police, magistrates, public servants, pastors, media and reporters, who have contributed to concealing the fact of this action, are also charged with misprision. People don't realize. For any public servant to conceal, hide, or aid the crime of treason is to be guilty of the same offence. And these persons cannot hold any public office whilst under the charge of treason. New World Order plans uncovered. The New World Order are the world banking cartel who own all reserve banks. They control the world economy, they have the rights to print the money for all countries under the United Nations, and consequently they make trillions of dollars in fractional reserve lending and they dictate the price of gold, making huge profits from the highs and lows, yet they pay no taxes, and own their own free sovereign states in England and USA with diplomatic immunity, at the Crown London and Washington, and the third in their circle of New World Order is the Vatican sovereign state. They reap in trillions of dollars interest daily from all United Nations member countries' government debts and are forcefully promoting more increased debts before wiping each government's control of the country out. To gain control over each government, their favorite MO is to provide bailout funds and to offer stimulus packages, all of which will never be repaid. Governments are conned to sell off their public-owned assets such as transport, shipping, rail etc. as the New World Order United Nations takeover can then take full control of these corporations without the need to gain public referenda approval. Unions are up in arms about these fraudulent sales. Governments are coerced into taking more loan money to use as stimulus packages to improve the economy so as to get governments into huge debts they will have no chance of repaying, preparing the way for the New World Order to come in and take over all assets. What's more, the Agenda 21 urges governors to sell off their assets such as railways, transport, shipping, insurance, water, power, banking, on the pretext that it will help reduce the huge debts. This is farcical and the real reason is for New World Order takeovers, to gain easier control over private corporations than they would have with public-owned utilities, so it is to their advantage to get the government of the day to offload them before the New World Order takeover. This shows how gullible our government is to get duped by the New World Order rhetoric. We have been sold out since 1975 by all leaders in every government. We have only one chance to stop it. Keep pestering your member with these facts, and sever the United Nations treaties. Under treaties, the UN Charter, the United States Congress has established the Charter as the supreme law of the land. Fuji v. State of California, 1950-52, and all global member states of the United Nations including Australia have illegally sworn an allegiance to this United Nations foreign power, and to get any state to do this the United Nations instructed the Red Australian federal government to suspend the constitution, avoiding the need for a referendum. If you regard this as the most serious threat to Australian way of life and our freedom, join the new party, Australian Sovereignty Party, urgently. Following are just some of the policies of the United Nations: control of all zoning states matters in all member states and the control of our national parks, rivers and historical sites, barrier reef etc. Control over whether women are allowed to have babies. Control over population. Control over all food sources. Control over our farms. Control over all land and property. Control over the economic and judicial policies of all nations member states incorporated Australia. Programs are being processed to create a tax on citizens of all member states as a permanent method of United Nations funding. The fraudulent carbon tax is designed to fund the WHO, United Nations New World Order security forces. The United Nations has its own army, and United States soldiers and military from all member states must swear allegiance to this foreign government. Member states have been set up to roll over into United Nations control. So far these states are bankrupt, and the IMF will take over governance and initiate the IMF banking cartel's policies in Argentina, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Greece, more soon to follow, and Australia next. Subject matter: the grand jury process that has been activated by private prosecution right against Julia Gillard and others, involving an organized attack on the Constitution of the Commonwealth and other state constitutions to impose a United Nations agenda upon all Australians. Grand jury process: the legal right to go before a grand jury in the state of Victoria exists at Section 354 of the Victorian Crimes Act 1958. To activate the right by private prosecution, Julia Gillard was charged with the common law offence of concealing treason. The charge was filed in the Melbourne Magistrates Court during December of 2007 and served January 15, 2008 at the Senate Street Werribee Electoral Office, returnable to Melbourne Magistrates Court on January 29, 2009. The others: on the 29th January 2009 there were other defendants also charged, in addition to 28 other defendants charged her December 15, 2006, all relating to the same offence. The problem: since 1984 there has been an organised concerted attack on all constitutions in the Commonwealth of Australia purportedly to achieve a republic, but, in reality, to trap every Australian into a United Nations agenda without their knowledge nor consent. Fee simple titles: Queensland. In the state of Queensland, a corporation has been set up to purportedly gather all fee simple titles into this particular corporation called the Brigalow Corporation. To effect this, certain laws have been altered or amended in Queensland to achieve this objective. The United Nations purpose: the United Nations has given federal government a mandate of ownership for housing, farms, property and business to government control, once the Republic has been proclaimed in Victoria. With total disregard to the Commonwealth referendum result held during 1999, the Victorian Parliament introduced a bill titled Courts and Tribunals Legislation Further Amendment Bill on May 24, 2000. The purpose of the bill was to abolish the Oath of Allegiance from the Legal Practice Act 1996. R. Hulls, Attorney General, Victoria. The bill was introduced into the Victorian Parliament by Mr. R. Hulls, the Attorney General for the State of Victoria. The bill did become an act without any referendum and full breach of the 1999 Commonwealth referendum result. Western Australia. On January 1, 2004, the Attorney General of Western Australia, Mr. J. McGuinty, in agreement with the then Governor Mr. Sanderson, enacted an act titled Acts Amendment and Repeal Courts and Legal Practice Act 2003 WA. The purpose of the Bill Act was to remove the Crown and Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, her heirs and successors and subjects from specific law within Western Australia in full breach of the 1999 Commonwealth referendum result. The Bill Act did not have any referendum authorising this legislation. All Attorney Generals in the period December 15, 2006 and January 29, 2007, when Julia Gillard was charged, all current Attorney Generals operating within the Commonwealth of Australia were also charged by private prosecution, after which the legal right to the grand jury process was also activated in relation to each Attorney General. Damien Bugg, Commonwealth Public Prosecutions. The Director of Public Prosecutions, Mr. Damien Bugg, was also charged with the other defendants, but Mr. Bugg sent an office delegate to the court to have his criminal charge dismissed with the other named defendants. The retaliation. Because criminal charges for serious indictable offences were filed against government officials, 2 Attorney Generals filed civil actions against myself to have their courts declare vexatious litigation in an attempt to conceal the grand jury process activated in criminal jurisdiction against themselves. The arrest. At the appeal full court, the 3 Supreme Court judges, Styler, Buss and Christine Wheeler, were informed from the bar table that the removal of both the Crown and Monarch from the Supreme Court Act WA was an act of treason, and as such the 3 judges were primary offenders, accordingly were placed under arrest from the bar table and formally charged for such offence in the Melbourne Magistrates Court, now pending grand jury process. Corin Rayner, Supreme Court Registrar. Costs have been incurred in Western Australia involving the civil writ instigated by McGuinty Bugg against myself. Corin Rayner was the registrar who heard the taxing issue relating to the Supreme Court costs. Corin Rayner was murdered by persons unknown and her body buried in Kings Park overlooking Perth, Western Australia are Hull's Attorney General Victoria. To halt and delay the criminal process activated against specific government officials, or Hull's, the Victorian Attorney General also issued a civil writ against myself to get his courts to declare Brian Shaw a vexatious litigant in the state of Victoria. His courts. I say his courts, because it was Mr. Hulls that introduced the Bill Now Act titled Courts and Tribunals Legislation Further Amendment Act into the Victorian Parliament, removing the oath of allegiance without referendum approval in breach of the 1999 referendum result. The order sought by Mr. Hulls was given by Justice Hanson, stating, Mr. Shaw can only file further process by leave of a court presided over by an Australian lawyer. Australian lawyer. For any person to sit in any court within the state of Victoria under the auspices of an Australian lawyer is to agree with the oath of allegiance being removed from the Legal Practice Act in Victoria, legislation introduced by Mr. Hulls himself. The appeal of the Hulls writ was heard by Justice Dodds, Treason and Nettle. Both were challenged for bias and after consideration continued the appeal hearing and upheld the decision of Hanson given in the civil judgment. Dodds Streeton, the defendant judge. The challenge of bias concerning Justice Dodds Streeton emanated from the National Bank writ issued against the Walter family. During the hearing of the Walter matter, Dodds Streeton did admit having a financial interest with the National Bank. When asked by Carmen Walter to stand down, Dodds Streeton declined, heard the matter resulting in the loss of $4 million worth of real estate at Wodonga, Victoria. Civil or criminal jurisdiction. The fundamental and basic principle of law activates that whenever and wherever indictable offences are discovered in any civil matter, the criminal matter takes priority over the civil. The criminal charges lodged by myself and others involving and discovering serious indictable offences ranging from treason to judges hearing their own matters have not been withdrawn and remain pending grand jury process. Local government. If the United Nations agenda as revealed by Beasley's statement is to function within Australia, then local government must submit and agree to the United Nations agenda, which is the purpose of informing yourselves local government via this information. The three tiers of government are local, state and federal. Grand jury. The only competent and legal jurisdiction to hear the twin offences of treason and or misprision of treason concealment of is a sitting grand jury 23 electors. This is stated law. It is provided now that all the prosecutions shall be by presentment, but preserving the prerogative of the Crown through the Attorney General to proceed by information, except in case of treason which has to be by indictment. Now indictment means by grand jury, and therefore, inasmuch as the statute provides that treason shall be tried by indictment only. That means that it must be by grand jury and no other means is provided for bringing it before a grand jury. The finding of the Attorney General is equivalent to the findings of the grand jury, but in the case of treason it must be the finding of the grand jury. Byrne v. Armstrong 1899, 25 VLR 126 at 132, the application. Any application applying for a grand jury hearing in the state of Victoria under Section 354 of the Crimes Act 1958 Vic must be heard by the full court, not appeal court of the Supreme Court of Victoria sitting in criminal jurisdiction. The sitting judges hearing the application against the named defendants are limited to hearing the charge only. They are unable to enter into the evidence of the matter. Such jurisdiction is the exclusive jurisdiction of a sitting grand jury. The Section 354 does not place upon the full court the task of examining the evidence, nor of determining whether the prosecutor has established a true bill. The section bearing the interpretation, which was placed upon it many years ago, which has never been questioned by Parliament, gives the full court a limited role which is no more than we have described. It requires no more than an affidavit complying with the section, disclosing an indictable offence. Lorne Campbell 1986 BC 862-28, The Perverting Process Freemasonry. In the year 2001 Carmen Walter and myself the plaintiffs attempted to issue a civil writ against Freemasonry Victoria. The writ was refused by the Supreme Court prothonotary under verbal instruction of Justice Beach. Following the refusal of the civil writ, an application was lodged with the full court of the Supreme Court Victoria, the actual hearing. The events surrounding the actual hearing will be correctly placed into a separate affidavit, but, I will state in the correspondence to yourselves that the only intent of the full court of the Supreme Court 5 judges was to have the Byrne-Armstrong judgment overturned because it stated that where the affidavit reveals an indictable offense the court has no discretionary power but to order the sheriff to form the grand jury. Respect for the Constitution. Clearly there is now no respect for the Constitution of the Commonwealth or states, rather the constitutions have now been overlaid by a massive corporation structure, inclusive of the Supreme Courts and High Court. Your responsibility. You have now been formally informed of serious indictable offenses. You can choose to do nothing or you can choose to do something. The first thing that you should do is gather all relevant or actual facts. My responsibility. If you wish to be fully informed of the relevant facts inclusive of your legal responsibility, I will make myself available to answer any of your questions. The alternative. The alternative is to be summoned to a grand jury hearing and be placed into the witness box and be asked, what did you do after receiving the correspondence revealing treason and the concealment of treason? Legal advice. If you wish to seek legal advice, please advise the law firm giving the advice in writing that the oath of allegiance has been removed from the Legal Practice Act in Victoria by legislation introduced into Victoria by Mr. R. Hulls, the current Attorney General for the State of Victoria during May 2000. Competent jurisdiction. The only competent jurisdiction to hear and determine the evidence in relation to the twin offences of treason and the concealment of treason is a grand jury. An indictment for such offences can only be obtained from a grand jury. The Sheriff and the Queen. The words of the application order, he sheriff is ordered to summons the grand jury to appear at a court to be holden at a time and place determined by the court in accordance with the provision of Section 354 of the Crimes Act 1958 Vic to attend at such court at that time and place to inquire present do and execute all things which on the part of the Queen shall then and there be commanded of them. What is most disturbing by a handful of lawyers, judges, magistrates and politicians is the fact that they are firstly Australians. How dare they take such secret, covert and treasonable actions when they should be firstly protecting their own families, their own constituents, their own fellow Australians, and their own country. The Anzacs fought and died for their freedom and fought for our country to be in our own hands to prosper, not to be in alien United Nations New World Order bankers' selfish hands, particularly as they are trying to be the self-appointed rulers of the earth directing our government to enslave us with draconian laws. Your corporate-owned and run government working hard to protect you. Itself, from you, please help, share this article with others, see links to this below, thanks.
The heroic fight with us. The honest support us. The corrupt fear us. For we are anonymous. We are legion. We do not forget. We do not forgive. Expect us to expose you.